Good morning, everyone. Hello. So we're going to review this geometry node setup that I've done. Starting to feel like my terrain workflows are absolutely coming together. So this is kind of like a icy bridge. Um, and, uh, and let's get into how it was made. So there's a lot we could do to kind of continue to add to this, change things and stuff like that. But I don't have much more time. I try to finish these in an hour or so. Um, then I still have to do all the recording stuff. Anyway, so let's take a look at what's actually here. So this time, instead of having a singular object, we've broken things up. So we have the cliff, which is this kind of U-shaped mountain pass. We have the bridge right here, and then we do have some icicles as well. And a lot of these are additive. So let's start with the mountain. Okay, so looking at the mountain, we do have these rocks here. And these are what we're instancing across the surface. And I've put them into their own collection, these cliff rocks collection. And then over here, we have the actual cliff base. And if I click that and hit tab, you can see that this is the actual geometry that's there. Pretty simple, nothing too crazy. We only have one vertex group here, which is this path vertex group. And if I select it, you get an idea of what's actually been isolated with this selection. And basically that determines what parts are just snow rather than rock. So it's kind of the rock distribution or the inverse of it. I was thinking like Lord of the Rings while I was making this, like they're trying to do the mountain pass or whatever, and then they have to go through mines. Anyway, so that's kind of in the back of my head. Anyway, looking at the graph itself, we actually have a few graphs. So we'll start with the first one, which we'll call the icy, rocky terrain, something like that. And in here, it's pretty simple, nothing too crazy. By breaking things apart and using things as like, also Theo's right here, using them in like individual pieces rather than trying to make like a complete system, moving away from using primitive geometry within the graph to just using, I'm making custom terrain and I have custom rocks. These are all, the rocks and the terrain are made by hand. The placement and where things should go, that you want in a graph. Everything else should be a little bit manual, in my opinion. Okay, so looking at this, the first thing we do is we distribute points on faces. So this is controlled again by that path selection. So we're just distributing a bunch of points. And then most importantly, we are actually merging them afterwards, because otherwise it's just a crazy amount. You kind of think of just distribution here as like getting roughly the right density, and then merge by distance is capping the maximum density per area. I kind of like using both of them rather than just the density slider. Works a little bit better, in my opinion. And then, of course, we instance on those points. You can see we're placing all those rocks, and we're using some random value for random rotation and a random value for the scale. And then it's just using the collection. Now, the reason I kind of have been enjoying just having my palette of rocks just kind of floating in space here. So we've got our little rocks, and then these are the ones that are getting instanced here. There will be an offset if you do this. Like if I disable reset children, you can see that everything's kind of floating and in the wrong spot. You must have reset children if you're sampling from a collection. That way it's using the local origin of our rock. We can see the little point right here. That's the origin that's getting used. That's the origin that's getting used, rather than its distance from the world origin. Okay. All right, and then we just instance. Then I realize the instances to turn them into mesh rather than the instance objects, and then we join them together. That's pretty much it. There's really not much to them. I think I could have gone in and really started adding a bunch of detail and stuff, but if I can get close enough with just a simple mesh, simple vertex colors, I'm going to try to push that as far as possible before I get into getting crazy with the details. All right, now going to look at the snow here, this is even simpler. We just have a subdivision surface on that original mesh. So take the mesh, subdivide it, get nice and smooth, and then we're actually storing some colors on it. So what we do is we're mixing these colors and then storing them on the attribute. And just like my previous video, the material, that's the world, the object material, and this is the same material for all objects, just takes the attribute, color attribute, feeds it into the base color. That's it. It is really just that simple. And so we can set the colors in our node rather than in a material or our UVs or through a texture. We just set them in the node and display them as intended. And I think there'll be a little bit more I do as I go on in order to integrate roughness and metallic. For now, we're not worried about that. Now, when you're setting things to face corners, sometimes you do need to use the evaluate on domain node, otherwise it won't quite behave as expected. By evaluating it on the point, we get these nice smooth fall-offs. And this is just purely for visual variation. Okay. And then, what else did I do? I set the position. Oh yeah, and this is just a little bit of random offset. Very, very minimal offset. I could kind of push that further if I wanted to. But then we'll shade smooth. And we'll get this nice snowy terrain. It looks really good even without the rocks. Now, because we're using a subdivision and displacing, you can see we get some rather uneven distribution or bumpiness there. And that's because on our base mesh, we have literally more resolution there. If you wanted to even that out, you would either need to dissolve these, which would be my way, or subdivide the rest a lot more. But I'm not worried about that right now. Okay, and then we can look at the join. Boom, very rocky. I could, of course, expose some of this if I wanted to like create a slightly less rocky environment. Super useful. But I like the density because I kind of wanted to imply like a much more solid cliff face. We'll see if there might be some other ways to do this, but that was the plan for this one. And yeah, the only other node I have on the terrain is this icicles graph, and then this one's pretty straightforward. So we take the original geometry, which is what we're seeing right here. Then we're distributing points on faces, but only we're using this select normal. We're using giving it a direction and comparing like which way is this face facing. And so in this case, we're doing a downward direction and only distributing points there. Then of course we merge to clean it up, and then we instance our icicles. Then we just join it all back together, and we've got some nice icicles. Pretty simple. Okay, let's look at the bridge now. So the bridge is my second object that I made. And under the hood, it is actually just a plane. I really should turn off the grid as I work. I like it while I'm working, but once I'm doing the recording, it gets in the way. So the bridge here, pretty simple, just a plane that's been subdivided and sliced. We have one vertex group, which is the railing, and it's this outside edge selection. And from that, we get all this. We also have these bridge components, which are these pieces here. These tiles are the tiles right here. And then obviously these are these little turrets or whatever. And then this is the profile for these pieces here, our edges, railing. Okay, so how do we make it? Oops, let me delete the node. Save. Okay, so how do we make it? First thing we did was to, it looks like we did split off in a few different directions, but we'll start with the base here. So the base of our geometry, we just subdivided, get some more points. And then we used my custom node face instancer to take this tile and slap it right on in there. And that's that. That's kind of the base of the bridge. I also deleted some faces because I kind of wanted it to look a little ruined or something. But just playing around with that, and that's this Boolean value here. Delete the geometry, then instance the faces. All right, next is we're taking the railing, so we're taking the points on the very edge, using our named attribute to select them. Then we delete some of them, and then we instance our little turret on all of them, and then join it at the end. And that gets joined with our tiles. And then the bottom part, I also think is my favorite part. It's a kind of an elegant way to do this, in my opinion. But basically, we make the selection, so we delete the geometry to get just these edges. Then we turn them into curves right here. We resample for some higher resolution. And then we're going to set the position. Boom. Now, the question is, how did I get this curve? Because all I'm doing is setting the position upward. Now the trick is that you can get the factor of a curve, and the factor is from the start to the end, mapping that to a range of 0 to 1. So 0 is the start, 1's the end. And then I polarize that. And so what that does is it actually will put 0 on both ends. So 0 at the start, 0 at the end, but the middle is 1. Now, without these two nodes, we actually would get this kind of sharp edge. But what we can do to make a curve, if you have a range of 0 to 1, you can map that to sine, just like classic algebra. You can map, you feed a value into sine, and you get where that is on the circle. So we take our factor, multiply it by pi, and then feed it through sine, or multiply it by sine, or however you want to say that. And then that's what gives it the curve. Without the sine, we get something like this. With the sine, we get something nice like that. Nice even curve. All right, and now the one issue with what we have currently is just that it's floating. It's actually above the original position. So we just take that same offset value, invert it, and then push it down a little bit more, and set that position so that it's kind of close to its starting point. We wanted to push the ends down rather than up. And yeah, and then we just join that together, or we join that with the original curves here, the railing curves. Then we feed all of that in a curve to mesh, which gives us this nice railing right here. To make it look a little bit nicer, we also do set mesh normals, so we get these nice sharp edges. And then you guessed it, we join it all together, and that's our bridge. And then the icicles is just the same thing as before. We don't need it. This one's not any different than the icicle node. Yeah. And anyway, for just like sitting down and farting around for an hour, I think that we're making some very, very solid progress. I think I can foresee creating environments really rapidly now. And one cool thing you can do in Blender too, I believe you have to enable this. I'm not 100% sure how you do, but we can actually explore this. So if I hit Shift and then tilde, I believe, we get a little first-person controller. We can actually walk around our little environment that we crafted, which is pretty cool. If I was making this for a game, perfect. That gives me just like a really nice way to test without getting it all into Unity. I can get a feel for what it's actually going to be like. And honestly, I was a little surprised, since I did this towards the end, at how small the bridge was. I was expecting it to be a bit bigger, but it turns out it's just like a kind of a footbridge. Anyway, that's it for today's geometry note. So thanks for taking a look, taking a listen, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye. Also, Theo says bye. He says, I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Eat that finger. All right. Catch you guys later. Bye.